We see national parks as postcards, vistas of granite and pine, crisp air and pristine trails. But to the rangers who patrol them, these wild places are not just scenery. They are living, breathing entities with shadows that last long after the sun dips below the ridgeline. Rangers know the rules of the backcountry. Stay on the trail, carry a radio, never ignore a noise you can't explain. But sometimes, the wilderness doesn't play by the rules. Sometimes it turns a routine patrol into a descent into the unthinkable. The three rangers in tonight's stories are seasoned professionals, not prone to flights of fancier campfire tales. Yet each of them walked into a part of their park that was never meant for human eyes. Arden Muldoon answered a distress call deep in the Smokies and found a missing hiker whose face held too many mirrors. Kestrel Voss heard the trees themselves begin to speak on a frozen midnight in Yellowstone, using a voice that should have been buried years ago. And Hollister Fain stumbled into a valley in Denali that the maps had deliberately erased, a place where the land itself seemed to be dreaming. These are their stories, told in their own words. Turn down the light, listen to the silence between the words, and remember, the parks belong to something far older than us, and it doesn't like visitors who wander off the trail. My name is Arden Muldoon. I'm a law enforcement ranger stationed at Great Smoky Mountains National Park. And in late September of 2024, I was working a solo night shift at the Deep Creek Ranger Station when a call came in that still replays behind my eyelids every time. Close them, a woman's voice, crackling through the emergency radio on channel 16. The SAR frequency, breathless and thin, saying she had found a lost hiker near the junction of Indian Creek Trail and the old logging spur, a teenage boy, alone and disoriented, but there was something wrong with his face. The call was strange for several reasons. First, the woman didn't identify herself, no name or badge number, and second, the Indian Creek Trail had been closed since a rockslide in July, and no ranger. No hiker should have been out there. And third, her voice carried a weird mechanical echo, like she was speaking through a pipe. I radioed back, asking for her location and details, and all I got was a burst of static. And then that same voice saying, "He's asking for you by name, Ranger Muldoon. He says he knows you from the search last year," and my stomach dropped because last year I had coordinated a search for a missing 17-year-old named Caleb Trevane, boy who had vanished from the Benton McKay Trail and was never found. And his face, his photo, had hung on my station wall for 6 months. I grabbed my pack and my service weapon and hiked the 3 miles to the junction alone. The trail dark and silent except for the wet crunch of my boots on fallen leaves, and when I reached the old logging spur, my headlamp picked out 2 figures standing in a small, mossy clearing. A woman in a tan ranger uniform, but the uniform was wrong. The patches were from the 1970s. The hat was the old style. And her face was pale and smeared with dirt, her eyes hollow, and beside her, just behind her, was a boy about 17. Wearing the same tattered blue jacket that Caleb Trevane had worn in his last known photo, the same missing front tooth, the same scar on his chin. But his face was wrong, deeply wrong. His features were present, but they were reflected as if in a curved mirror. The eyes too far apart, the mouth too wide, the skin shimmering slightly like heat haze, and every time my headlamp swept across him, his face flickered and updated with a different expression that didn't belong to him, a smile I'd seen on my own mother. A frown from my high school coach, the blank stare of a hitchhiker I'd once passed, as if his face was a screen cycling through a library of stolen looks. The woman spoke, and her voice was the radio voice, that metallic echo, and she said, "He's been waiting for you, Arden. You were the last face they showed him before he went into the trees. And he's been wanting to show you what the trees taught him in return. I told them to stay back." I identified myself as a federal officer. And the boy, Calebor, the thing wearing Caleb's shape, took a step toward me. And his face snapped into a perfect replica of my own father, down to the crow's feet and the chipped tooth, and he said, in my father's voice, "Artie, you came to find me? I knew you'd come. The woods have been keeping me warm. They want to keep you too." And then the woman smiled, and her own face flickered, and I saw that she wasn't a ranger at all, but a construct. A puppet woven from moss and bark and old uniform cloth, and her mouth opened wider than any human mouth could open. And inside was a darkness that seemed to pull at the light from my headlamp, draining it, and I felt a deep, bone-sucking cold that had nothing to do with the September air. I drew my weapon, but I couldn't pull the trigger on my father's face, and I backed away, and the woman's voice, now coming from the boy, now from the trees themselves, said, "You passed the first test, Ranger, the test of recognition. The woods will remember you. And one day when you're alone on the trail, we'll show you all the faces we've collected. And you'll pick one to wear for the rest of your time in the shade." I turned and ran, and the trees seemed to lean in, branches stretching and grasping. And I burst onto the main trail and sprinted until I hit the station, and I filed a report that was marked inconclusive and later disappeared from the system entirely. But I know what I saw. And I know that somewhere in the deep hollows of the Smokies, a thing that was once a missing boy is still walking, still wearing a patchwork of stolen faces, still waiting for the next ranger to answer a radio call that shouldn't exist. I'm Kestrel Voss. I've been a backcountry ranger in Yellowstone for 12 years, stationed at the Tower Roosevelt Junction. And I've guided grizzly biologists, wrangled bison off roads, humped through every thermal basin in the park, without ever once feeling the kind of ancient, crawling dread that found me on the night of February 14th, 2025, a frozen, moonless night when I was driving the Lamar Valley Road on a routine poacher patrol, and I saw a light in the trees. The light was pale blue, flickering like a dying lantern, bobbing among the lodgepole pines about a quarter-mile off the road. And I pulled over, grabbed my thermal imaging scope, and scanned the area for heat signatures, expecting a lost snowmobiler or an elk down with an injury, but the scope showed nothing, no warm bodies. No heat at all, just the ambient cold of the snow and the strange pulsing blue light that my scope registered as a cold spot. Colder than the air around it, as if the light itself was a hole where warmth went to die. I radioed my dispatcher, but the radio returned only a low, rhythmic static that sounded uncannily like breathing. Slow and deliberate in and out, and then the static formed a pattern, a word, my own name. Kestrel spoken in a voice I recognized as my brother's. My younger brother, Eamon, who had died in a climbing accident in the Tetons 10 years ago. A voice I'd grieved and buried and moved past, and now it was whispering through my radio in the middle of the park. I turned off the radio, my hands trembling from more than the cold. And I told myself it was a fluke, a trick of the atmosphere. But then the blue light moved, and the trees around it began to murmur. Not with wind, there was no wind, but with actual speech, dozens of low, overlapping voices that used words and phrases I knew intimately. my childhood address, the name of my first dog, the exact last words Iman had said to me before he left for the Tetons. "Don't worry, Cassie, I'll be back by Tuesday." The voices layered and swirled, and I stepped out of my truck, drawn against my will, my boots crunching in the crusted snow as I walked toward the light, and I saw that the light was coming from a single tree, an ancient gnarled lodgepole that looked burned, its bark black and glossy, and in its branches hung dozens of small, silver bells, or what I thought were bells until I got closer and realized they were voice boxes. Tiny anatomical structures like the syrinx of a bird, made of frost and cartilage, vibrating in the cold air to produce human speech, each one a different stolen voice, and the light pulsed in time with their vibrations, and at the base of the tree, lying in a drift of snow, was a human skull, the cranium cracked open like a blooming flower, the jaw missing, and the voice coming from the largest bell. A bell shaped like a human ear was Eamon's, saying, "Kessie, you came. I knew you'd come. The tree kept my voice for you. Keeps everyone's voice who dies in the park. It's been collecting since the volcanic winter, and now it wants yours to add to the choir." I stumbled backward, and the tree's bells jangled louder, and the voices rose into a discordant symphony of pain and memory. And I saw for the first time that the tree wasn't a single trunk, but a central hub of a massive subterranean mycelial network, its roots spreading under the snow in a lattice that pulsed with the same blue light, leading to other trees, other bells. An entire forest converted into a repository of souls lost within the park's boundaries, a biological archive of tragedy. And it was learning from each voice, building a composite personality that was now reaching out with my brother's memory to lure me into its cold embrace. I drew my flare gun, my one source of heat, and I fired it directly at the tree's trunk. A brilliant red arc that struck the black bark and sizzled, and the tree screamed not in a voice, but in a blast of radio static that fried my earpiece and knocked me to my knees, and the blue light guttered and died, and the bells went silent. And I ran back to my truck and drove faster than I've ever driven on those icy roads. Back to the station, where I collapsed in front of the night shift and babbled something they later chalked up to carbon monoxide poisoning from a faulty heater in my vehicle. The report was filed as an environmental hazard. But I know it wasn't a hazard. It was a predator, a collector, and it's still there. In the Lamar Valley, its root network spread across 100 square miles. And I hear Eamon's voice sometimes on the wind when I patrol that valley. And I know the tree is regrowing its bells, waiting for the next ranger who hears a dead loved one call them into the cold. Hollister Fain. I'm a wilderness ranger and cartographer assigned to Denali National Park's Backcountry unit. And my primary responsibility is to verify the accuracy of topographic maps against the actual terrain. A job that sends me alone into some of the most remote and untracked country on Earth. And in June of 2026, I discovered a valley that didn't exist on any map, satellite image, or a historical survey of a place that had been deliberately erased. I was traversing the north slope of the Alaska Range, off-trail, about 40 miles west of Wonder Lake, when I crested a low ridge and saw a broad U-shaped valley below me that wasn't on my topo map. I triple-checked my GPS, my compass, my altimeter, according to every instrument. I should have been looking at a featureless glacial plain. But instead I was looking at a dense forest of stunted black spruce, the winding creek, and a cluster of old weathered structures that looked like log cabins arranged in a circle. I radioed base, but my signal cut out as soon as I keyed the mic, replaced by a deep, low hum that vibrated through the radio speaker and into my skull. Sound I felt as much as heard, like a throat singing a note that was just below human hearing. I descended into the valley, my training warring with my curiosity, and as I walked among the cabins, I saw that they weren't cabins at all. They were monuments. Each one a perfect miniature replica of a different national park ranger station I recognized. The Old Faithful Cabin, Yosemite Valley Station, the Grand Canyon Backcountry office, the same one I'd started my career in at Big Bend, all built from stone and wood and rendered in unsettling exact detail, down to the peeling paint and the welcome mats, but scaled to 3/4 size, as if built by someone who had only seen them in photographs and gotten the perspective wrong. The hum grew louder as I approached the central cabin, a replica of the Denali headquarters. Building and I pushed open the door and found a room filled with maps. Hundreds of maps, hand-drawn on birch bark and stretched over frames of bone, each one depicting a different national park, but with impossible additions. Trails that didn't exist, lakes that were perfectly circular and labeled mirror, peaks with heights that were negative numbers. And in the center of each map, a black spiral was drawn with the words "Here dwells the dreamer," written in an old spidery script. The hum was emanating from the floor, a vibration that I could now feel in my teeth, and I knelt and pulled back a piece of rotted canvas to reveal a stone staircase descending into darkness, and from that darkness came a voice. Gentle and sonorous, and older than anything I'd ever known, saying, "Another cartographer, another binder of space, come down and see the source of all your parks. The sleeper whose breath carves the valleys, and whose dreams filled the trails with hungry pilgrims. I should have turned back then, but something, the same force that had kept that valley hidden from satellites and surveys, pulled me down those stairs, and I descended into a vast, bioluminescent cavern, its walls glowing with a soft fungal light, and there at the center, resting on a bed of moss and antler, was a creature I cannot describe, except to say it was immense. Shaped roughly like an elk, but with a body made of stone and root and glacial ice. Its antlers spiraling upward into the cavern's roof where they fused with the earth above, and its eyes were closed. Its breathing slow and rhythmic, and with each exhale, the maps upstairs would flutter, and the trails on them would shift and move, and I understood with a primal, horrified clarity that this thing, this dreaming beast, was the source of the entire national park system. That the wilderness we thought we protected was actually its dreamscape, and that the missing hikers, the unsolved SAR cases, the strange lights and ghost voices, they were all the result of its restless dreams, and it had called me here to be its new cartographer, the next steward of its ever-shifting topography, because the last one, whose bones I now saw in a corner, had died of old age a century ago. I backed up the stairs, and the beast's breathing quickened, and its voice echoed after me. "You'll return, Hollister Fain. You're already mapping me in your mind. And every map you draw from now on will be a map of my body, and you'll find your way back. Because I've already added you to my dream." I surfaced into the valley and ran, and I didn't stop until I reached my base camp, and I quit the Park Service that week, moved to a city where the only green is in planters, but every night when I sleep, I see new maps forming behind my eyes, trails I've never walked, lakes that reflect a sky that isn't ours. and a black spiral with my own name written at the center. And I know it's just a matter of time before the dream pulls me back to that valley, to sit beside the ancient dreaming thing and trace its endless, restless geography for the rest of my life. Arden, Muldoon, Kestrel, Voss, and Hollister Fain each entered the backcountry, thinking they were protectors of the park. They left knowing the park protects itself and that something far older, stranger than any federal mandate holds dominion there. These accounts are not isolated. Rangers across the country have whispered similar stories in station break rooms, late-night log entries, and reports that get filed away and never acted upon. The wilderness is more than scenery, dissentient in ways we're only beginning to glimpse, and those who patrol it are the first to encounter its edges. If you've ever experienced something unexplainable in a national park, a voice on an empty trail, a face in the trees that didn't belong, a place that felt wrong on a map, tell us in the comments. Your story might be the missing piece in a much larger puzzle. I'm your host at True Terror Files. Subscribe and hit the bell. We release a new deep dive into America's darkest corners. Until next time, respect the wild, stay on the trail, and never answer a voice in the woods that calls you by name. The park might be awake, and it might be hungry.